Hello, countrymen. I hope that you're doing well as you watch this. Unfortunately, our leadership in America is not. They have a banking crisis, and what they're doing is they are pouring liquidity into the banks, while at the same time they are continuing to hike. There was even another hike today for interest rates for Main Street America. And so as I've discussed on my previous videos on this topic, they are basically wiping Main Street America out while providing the banks the liquidity they need so that they never pay. Not only do they not pay for their mistakes, but they will have the capital necessary to buy your house when you can't make your mortgage payment because the Fed crashed the economy. They're trying to put all the pain of fighting inflation on Main Street America while Washington, D.C. does not change its behavior. Now, they can't stop inflation that way. They can't stop inflation. They need to reduce the money supply to stop inflation. But they're just trying to reduce the money supply to Main Street while they open the spigot to the banking system. It doesn't work. We feel the pain, but it's all made up for with the money they release to the banks and the government. The government keeps spending money. The government keeps weaponizing the dollar. And unless they change their behavior and share in the sacrifice needed to stop inflation, then it won't be stopped. So I'm sorry, many people right now, they rely on big government. They think we need big government. They can't imagine life without it. But guys, the dollar is in trouble, and you can't stop the inflation unless we reduce the size and scope of government. You may think that's a wonderful idea. You may think that's a terrible idea. It doesn't matter. We have to do it. And so if there are any adults left in the room, we should start having that conversation about what government spending should be cut, because we have to cut it. Otherwise, basically, we've had a good party on debt, and now it's time to figure out who pays the debt, or at least quit adding to the debt so that we can preserve the currency. But that's not even what this video is about. This video is about how they do the scam. Okay? What brought this on? How did we get here? Why are we in a situation where we're raising interest rates on Main Street America, but yet again bailing out the big banks? What happened? I'm going to explain that. Stand by. Now, you may think that our banks operate under a system called fractional reserve banking, but they don't. They no longer operate under the principle of fractional reserve banking. And some of my friends, like the von Mises people, they think fractional reserve banking is inherently evil. I do not. I don't think it's inherent fraud. I think that it has to be managed. I think that the government does have to act to limit leverage so that things like this don't happen very strictly. But government doesn't want to, because whenever leverage is loosened, then good economic times follow, because easy money causes those good times, even if they're not based on anything real, anything but the easy access to money. But the politicians love it, so they let the banks operate with too little leverage. In fact, in March 2020, they finally lowered the reserve requirement rate to what? Zero on a broad range of asset classes. And before that, they had the reserve rate set to 0 on asset classes they favored, like their own paper, their own bonds from the federal government. So that's it. How is that fractional reserve banking? There's no reserves. And that's why when these banks get in trouble, and they get in trouble so easily, and there's so much fragility to the system, the government has to rush in and bail out the banks. And you're thinking, I'm hurting in Main Street. They've got this new $2 trillion program, this term facility, added to their old program, the Fed discount window. And it's just insane. The bankers are driving Maseratis, and I can't pay my mortgage. Yes, that is the design. I don't know whether they're sitting around thinking, let's take all of American middle class and make them into poor people and scoop up all their assets. But that's going to be the result. It doesn't matter whether there's a conspiracy or that's their intent, or they're just doing what they have to do to survive another day, and that's what they have to do to survive another day, is rig things so that they get more and more, even if they don't deserve it, and you get less and less, even if you don't deserve it. And that's what's happening. Neither party is talking about it. I've often said, if we can't find candidates who will talk about it in the two existing parties, make a new one. It is that important. So, the banks, for years, not just since 2020, but for years, they've been buying government paper. And they don't have to keep any reserves on government paper. They hadn't for years. So ordinarily, if you have to keep a reserve requirement, it limits the amount of credit you can create for yourself. But with no reserve requirement, they can do this. They can buy a treasury note. They can buy Fed paper, maybe Fannie Mae. They buy that paper, it pays an interest rate, and they can collect that interest rate, but they can also use it as collateral to extend themselves credit and do what? Go buy another one. They can go buy another treasury bond. They can go buy another Fannie Mae paper. They can buy more of it. And then they can use that as credit, as collateral, to extend themselves yet more credit and go do the same thing again. So every auction they can go back and buy more paper using what is collateral to get the credit to buy this paper. The paper they bought before. Don't you see what happens, folks? They can leverage to infinity. They can keep buying paper with their old paper as collateral until the size of the financial sector just dwarfs the economy. And even though this paper may not pay a very high interest rate, just the sheer mass of the paper they own is so great that the interest payments are enormous. And they didn't have to earn the money to buy it. They created the money to buy it. They needed enough capital to buy the first one. And then after that, each note they buy serves as the collateral they need to buy the next one. Now, that sounds cheating. That sounds like cheating. Shouldn't the government put a stop to it? No, the government wants it to happen. The government enabled it because they need somebody to buy all this paper. If you're spending $1 trillion a year that you don't have, you need somebody to buy the paper, preferably at a low interest rate, so that you can afford even more debt. And so what this does is create a fake demand for the paper, because the banks know it's not just, why are you buying paper that pays 2% when you know inflation is, even a few years ago, is 4% or more? Because it's a magic money machine. Because it allows you, it's not just that one bond you can buy, it becomes collateral for the next bond, then collateral for the next bond, then collateral for the next bond. If you can leverage it 50 to 1, that's not 2% interest, that's 100% interest. And over time, that's what they can do with this system. The politicians love it because it allows them to deficit spend without interest rates holding them to account. In other words, they've disassociated from the market. Now, these are what the elites are doing, but is this really, do you have to be elite to run this system? Does it require sort of like supreme intellect or special talent? No. They're not elite in ability. They're not elite in wisdom. They're only elite in power because they found a way to attach themselves to a magic money machine, unplug it, and they have feet of clay like the rest of us. In fact, we are now at the point where the scam is ending, and here's why. People were outraged in 2008 when they bailed out the banks. And in fact, that was the true start of the Tea Party. I have another video about that. So this time, when the COVID crisis hit, they needed to shut things down, and they needed to bail out the banks again and keep liquidity going. And they said, you know what? To keep people from being outraged, we'll just give everybody money. We'll just pour a lot of money, and we'll give it to Main Street. We'll give them maybe 10%, 15% of what we give to ourselves, and cut them in on the looting of the next generation, because that's what debt that you can't pay back is. It's generational looting. So they're looting your children and grandchildren and those yet unborn in order to buy themselves a little love now and to keep the scam going a little longer. And so they shared that with the people, and it was inflationary. Of course it was inflationary. It's all inflationary, but they've managed to keep inflation under control because they kept the benefits within a tight circle before. That time they expanded it, and inflation really responded strongly. So they've now had to hike interest rates in a hurry, record speed hiking interest rates. Well, if you have a huge number of bonds in your portfolio that pay 2%, what happens to the value of those bonds when interest rates go to 4%, 5%? You see what happens? Those 2% bonds aren't as good an investment as they were. Now they're bonds out there with 4% interest. The value, you go underwater on your portfolio, basically, because the value of everything in your portfolio drops. So banks were sitting there, leveraged massively. They had very little real capital there, and they had a whole bunch of debt or leverage that they were using to buy other bonds, all of which were sinking in value. It's game over, right? I mean, they don't, when people say, we want our money to pull our money out of your system, maybe they only pull out 1% or 2% of the money, but that's all the banks have. The banks just have a bunch of credit and all these treasuries on the books, and they could sell those bonds to get some money to pay off their depositors, but the bond, they have to sell them for a loss because the market no longer supports those prices on that old paper. What do they do when they're caught like this? They have a cheat code, and the cheat code is cheating you. The cheat code is cheating you because what they do is the government says we're going to open this term banking facility and back it with $2 trillion of freshly created debt, taxpayer debt, and we're going to keep using our Fed discount window. And what both of these things do is allow banks to take these bonds that they could not get their book value on if they sold it in the free market, and the Fed will pay them for it as if they could still get the book value. They're pretending that market value is book value when it isn't. In other words, the taxpayers are eating the loss. It's either loaning money against those bonds at above market rates or buying them at above market rates. If they weren't above market rates, they wouldn't need the government to buy them. They just sell them on the market. But they are above market rates. And the total losses, I can't even imagine. $1 trillion probably won't begin to cover it as far as the total number of bonds that are underwater. After all, the new program that they started has $2 trillion in funding to buy the facility to buy these distressed banks' assets at above market rates. The discount window recently had $300 billion in assets in 1 week. In 1 week, where they sold to the Fed, either sold or got a loan, $300 billion worth, and the assets would not have been worth that much on the free market. So this is their way to escape the consequences of the financial chicanery that they've been doing. They just keep leveraging to the moon. They keep gambling on debt, and when they lose the gamble, they take those bad bets to the Feds, and the Feds buy them using taxpayer credit as if the bets had not been losing bets. Now, at some point, guys, that the system is going to crack, and we may actually be there right now. We're like Wile E. Coyote. We've run over the cliff, and we're looking down, and we just realize there's nothing underneath us. So it may be too late, but if it is not too late, then I think the states, people should start taking things into their own hands, their own financial security. They should start having a cushion outside the banking system. Perhaps states should start building their own parallel system or alternatives to the dollar, like other countries are doing. Other countries are protecting their people from the failure of the dollar and from the weaponization of the dollar by building a system of trade outside the dollar. I think U.S. states need to do the same thing, because Washington is not going to fix itself, guys. It's going down, and we don't need to go down with it. Thank you so much for listening. and I'll hope to see you next time.